China slabs a mandatory PCR test for all inbound travelers from South Korea starting Wednesday. Beijing says the move is equivalent to Seoul's extension of COVID-related visa curves on travelers from China. Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo issued a joint call to Pyongyang to halt its nuclear programs. In response, the regime insists it will pursue its nuclear ambitions while overseas threats exist. 2 years on from Myanmar's brutal military coup against a democratically elected government. How do things look in Myanmar now? We focus on the fight for justice on today's On Point. Starting today, China is bringing back a mandatory COVID test on all travelers arriving from South Korea. The move is seen as a direct response to Seoul's extension of visa issuance restrictions for visitors from China. Our Choi Min-jung starts us off this morning.
China abolished antivirus measures, including PCR testing for inbound travelers in early January, but there has been a policy U-turn for those arriving from South Korea. Starting Wednesday, all travelers coming from South Korea have to take a PCR test upon arrival. Anyone who tests positive will be isolated or quarantined at home or at a designated facility.
Regrettably, some countries still insist on adopting discriminatory entry restrictions against China. China firmly opposes this and has a reason to take necessary reciprocal measures.
Beijing's latest tit-for-tat move appears to be in retaliation for a decision by Seoul to continue its recently implemented policy to stop issuing visas for Chinese travelers wishing to come to Korea. The South Korean government announced last week that the visa restrictions, which were supposed to last until the end of January, would be extended for another month. However, Seoul has also said the measure could be lifted depending on the virus situation.
We will review whether we can lift the visa restrictions earlier, even before February 28th.
The quarrel between South Korea and China began in January as China decided to suspend its short-term visa services for South Koreans in retaliation for strengthened antivirus measures put in place by Seoul for inbound travelers from China as COVID-19 cases surged there. Although the short-term visa restrictions for South Koreans are still in place, Japan, which had been subject to similar retaliatory measures from China, saw visa issuance resume earlier this week. Seoul's foreign ministry official has reiterated that entry restrictions should never be based on factors other than to prevent the spread of COVID-19. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
South Korea, the U.S., and Japan jointly urged North Korea to dismantle its nuclear program and stop its missile provocations. But the North shot down the statement, saying it would not give up its nuclear weapons while threats exist. Our Lee Seung-ja has the latest.
During a UN conference on Tuesday, where countries around the world discussed the issue of peaceful disarmament, South Korea, the U.S., and Japan issued a rare joint statement urging North Korea to dismantle its nuclear program and stop provocations. The latest statement was made in response to North Korea's comments last month, where the regime said nuclear development exercises its right to self-defense against a nuclear threat from the United States, adding that nuclear reinforcements will continue as long as threats exist. Yoon Suk Yeol, South Korea's deputy ambassador at the UN Conference on Disarmament, stressed that North Korea launched 70 ballistic missiles last year alone, including 8 intercontinental ballistic missiles, adding North Korea's illegal nuclear and ballistic missile programs are a clear and blatant violation of a number of UN Security Council resolutions and represent a grave threat to peace and security on and around the Korean Peninsula. In response, North Korea completely rejected the joint statement with Chu Yong-chul from North Korea's mission to Geneva, stating that Pyongyang will never give up its nuclear weapons first and that there will be no negotiations in that regard. He added that as long as the United States has nuclear weapons and continues what he called anti-North Korea activities, the regime will continue to develop its nuclear program. Ju also criticized Japan, calling it a military dinosaur in the region, while slamming the U.S. for trying to form an Asian version of NATO. 이승재, Arirang News.
More Seoul Washington military drills and more advanced assets to the Korean peninsula. Defense chiefs from the two countries once again refreshed their commitment against the nuclear missile threats from Pyongyang. Our defense correspondent Oh Soo-young has more.
Seoul and Washington will expand and bolster their combined military capabilities, leaving no stone unturned in deterring North Korea's growing threats to regional stability. That's according to the South Korean and US defense ministers following their high-level talks on Tuesday. In a joint press conference at Seoul's defense ministry, the two officials reaffirmed their commitment to the US extended deterrence, which guarantees that Washington will defend its ally from both conventional and nuclear attacks. First, they confirmed the two sides will hold tabletop exercises, or TTX, in February, which simulate scenarios of North Korea's nuclear attacks. TTX were held annually from 2011, but have only taken place twice during the last 6 years.
In order to realize peace and stability, we've agreed to elevate the level and scale of combined exercises and training. We will further reinforce the alliance's capabilities and posture by holding expanded field training exercises and combined live-fire exercises.
Amid growing debate regarding the viability of the extended deterrence policy against North Korea's growing nuclear and missile capabilities, the two defense ministers agreed to enhance combined capabilities, along with information sharing, joint planning and execution, and consultation mechanisms to respond to crises. They aim to complete a tailored deterrence strategy before their security consultative meeting this year, which would create a strategic and realistic framework focusing on specific threats. The two officials also agreed to hold Defense Trilateral Talks, or DTT, with Tokyo as soon as possible to strengthen cooperation on regional security, following up on their three-way agreement reached last November on sharing real-time information on North Korea's missiles.
And let me underscore our mutual belief that trilateral cooperation with Japan enhances all of our security. We held high-level dialogues, and we deployed assets including F-22s, F-35s, and the Ronald Reagan Carrier Strike Group.
Going forward, marking 70 years of security ties, Seoul and Washington will continue to upgrade and tighten their alliance with deployments that advance assets to the Korean peninsula and closer consultation between the two leaderships, turning extended deterrence assurances into action. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
President Yoon Suk Yeol also met with U.S. Defense Chief Lloyd Austin on Tuesday at the Yongsan Presidential Office to talk security. In a written statement, Senior Press Secretary Kim Eun-hye said that the two talked about maintaining peace on the Korean peninsula. President Yoon also called for a strong and effective extended deterrence from the U.S. and stressed the importance of combined military drills between the two countries. Lloyd Austin said that Washington will do its best for the extended deterrence and that the South Korea-U.S. alliance shares important values like freedom and democracy. Following South Korean President Yoon Suk Yeol's state visit to the UAE last month, the administration is zeroing in on a follow-up to a $30 billion investment pledge from Abu Dhabi. That includes Seoul's plan to launch an investment cooperation committee. Our political correspondent Han Sung-woo explains.
As a follow-up to his recent trip to the UAE, South Korean President Yoon Suk Yeol met with government officials and several of the nation's business leaders in Seoul, where he reiterated his support for an export-first economy driven by the private sector.
혁신의 최전선에서 우리 기업들이 닳고 다른 낡은 신발로 경기를 뛰게 할 수는 없습니다. 기업이 뛸 수 있도록 정부가 기업의 영업사원도 하고 기획사원도 돼야 합니다.
The meeting on Tuesday came less than 3 weeks after South Korea secured a $30 billion investment pledge from the UAE, aimed at increasing cooperation in the fields of nuclear, hydrogen, and solar energy, as well as defense. President Yoon, in his opening remarks, called for relations with the UAE to forge ahead with the development of what he termed a mutually beneficial project for an innovative investment partnership. This will involve South Korea launching an investment cooperation committee centered on government ministries and chaired by Finance Minister Chu Kyung-ho. Also a separate cooperation network involving both public and private entities. Scheduled to be launched sometime next month, they'll be part of a bilateral platform for investment cooperation designed to facilitate discussions with the UAE about where South Korea plans to focus the investment and how.
정부는 순방 성과의 즉각적인 후속 조치와 아울러 기업들이 경제 전쟁에서 힘껏 뛰고 경쟁할 수 있도록 우리 제도의 글로벌 스탠다드로의 전환을 탄탄히 준비해 나가겠습니다.
South Korea's trade ministry, meanwhile, will work with its counterpart in the UAE to monitor how the dozens of MOUs signed during President Yoon's state visit are being implemented. That'll involve not only strategic ministerial level talks later this year, but also, depending on the type of memorandum, firms and institutions actually visiting the UAE through a so-called Shuttle Economic Cooperation Group. Han Sung-woo, Arirang News.
Two years ago, Myanmar's military took power in a coup, justifying the takeover by alleging that the 2020 election in the country was a fraud. Now, that's when Aung San Suu Kyi's National League for Democracy won by a landslide. The hundreds of people who took to the streets in a protest were met with a violent military response. Now, 2 years into the coup, the fight for justice and democracy still remains unfinished business. Today, we discuss the issue more with Ms. Wei Wei Nu. She's the founder of Women Peace Network. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Sure. Please do update us on the latest situation in Myanmar. How are people fighting for democracy holding up? I mean, what is the sentiment there now?
Thank you. The pro-democracy movement remain resilient and strong despite the exacerbating human rights and humanitarian catastrophe. The military has actually killed over 3,000 people, arbitrarily arrested and detained over 17,000 people, and launched airstrikes and sort of campaign and use heavy weapons, etc. And that actually forced displacement of hundreds of thousands of people, including 1.5 million internally displaced persons. And at the same time, the Rohingya are at risk, at increased risk of genocide, and with the military's issuance of restrictions, arbitrary arrest, detentions of over 2,700 Rohingya, including over 800 women only in 2022. And despite of all of these challenges, the pro-democracy movement as a whole, institutions involved, the bodies involved, the National Unity Government, National Unity Consultative Council, and strike committees, protest leaders from the nonviolence protest to the armed resistance movement remain resilient and strong.
Right. It's really heartbreaking to hear about reports on violence from prisons too, but I'm glad that people are holding up. And there have been also comments, unfortunately, that the military is likely to hold on to the power for a prolonged period of time. Is that so? I mean, what moves are the military taking now?
In fact, the pro-democracy movement this time is stronger than any other time in the history. So we do not believe that the military will prolong, despite, in fact, it also shows that in one of the meetings last month, a leaked document shows that how they are fragile and how they are actually extremely concerned about the pro-democracy movement as a whole, as well as it is the fact that the military does not have a control over the entire country. And given the all other aspect of the pro-democracy movement and people dedications, we do not think that the military can prolong at this level, but definitely we need a lot more support from the international community not to make it happen, not not letting the military to prolong seizure of their power. As we know, the military is trying very hard to legitimize their illegal coup by engaging with a country like Russia or other neighboring countries, as well as UN entities and INGOs, UN entities, as well as also trying to trying to create these shams elections. They're trying very, very hard at this point to get some level of legitimacy so that they can remain in control. But the truth is that the military is not in control of the country, and military's power is shaken because of the people, dedication, commitment, and resistance. What is the most inspiring thing right now happening is that the young people, the younger generations a lot of the younger generation youth have a noble visions of a truly democratic federal future of the country. Unlike any other situations, now people are united. They cannot be divided by the military, and therefore military is extremely worried of the controlling the country. And so, we have faith. I think we need more support from the international community for us to achieve that, to succeed this revolution.
Yeah, I am glad to hear that people from different age backgrounds are involved in this democratic movement. Now, speaking of international support from the international community, what do you think is needed the most to fight against those who have rejected democracy? Is more support necessary? On what level? Tougher actions? I mean, what should be done now?
I think oftentimes the country like us, Myanmar, have been not on the front page of a lot of the international media and organizations. It's often overlooked while the world has other priorities. So what we think is our people are suffering from this human rights and humanitarian catastrophe. The military is committing war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. So for us to be able to overcome from this such a catastrophic situation, such a man-made disaster, and to defeat the military dictatorship, we really need a more comprehensive and robust rigorous support from the international community. That includes cutting the military's revenue by sanctioning military's businesses, military's oil and gas, and all of the related businesses and military individual. At the same time, banning the militaries from access to the weapons that the military is using using against the civilians through the airstrikes and other means. So we need to put on the global arms embargo on the country so the military cannot have access to this. One of the great examples is that today some countries like UK and Canada actually ban aviation fuel for the military to have access so that they cannot use airstrikes anymore. And this is a great example that other countries can also do. At the same time, the military should be isolated. No country should engage with the genocidal military. So we are asking the international community to cut the diplomatic ties with the military and engage with the national unity government over the military. So these are three things, fundamental things that they can do. On the other hand, given the history of the genocide and crimes against humanity that military committed, we believe that only ending impunity will pave the way for a truly sustainable democratic future. Without holding the perpetrators of these heinous international crimes accountable, we cannot move forward as a country. We need the international community to support the international justice processes to be able to hold the military accountable.
Sure. Civic groups.
And to the people of South Korea, we are inspired by your struggle for democracy, and we need your help in making ours reality. So contact your local representative to implement the measures that I described, and especially to your government to further its engagement with the democratic forces over the military junta, at the same time to implement sanctions against the companies that engage with the junta, including POSCO and Lotte.
Right. Democracy surely is a core value of South Korea. Thanks for mentioning that. And also, civic groups in South Korea, Myanmar civic groups in South Korea are also holding a press conference today in commemoration of this 2-year, anniversary of the military coups. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Now, on the local front, the basic taxi fare in Seoul increases by 1,000 Korean won, or roughly 80 cents on Wednesday. The initial minimum distance for which the base taxi fare is applied will be shortened to 1.6 kilometers from the previous 2 kilometers. Additionally, after the base fare is charged, an extra charge of 101 will be added for every 131 meters traveled, a change from the previous 132 meters. The base fares for premium taxis also rose by 501 or 41 cents. Seoul City government is also set to raise subway and bus fares in April after an 8-year freeze. Hyundai's new electric vehicle, the Ioniq 6, has beaten its Tesla equivalent in a distance test. Following the test by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, the South Korean automaker on Tuesday said the long-range RWD version of its Ioniq 6 electric sedan can travel an estimated 361 miles on a full charge. When compared to Tesla's similar-sized RWD Model 3, the Hyundai can go 89 miles further. Hyundai's Ioniq 6 also beat the Tesla model in terms of energy efficiency. For a look at the news from around the world, we now turn to our Matthew Ashley joining us here in the studio. Good morning, Matthew.
Good morning, Dami.
All right, let's start in France, where the second round of mass protests against the government's pension reform plans have intensified.
Well, that's right. On Tuesday, local time, French citizens brought the country to a standstill for the second time this month. Now, France saw several schools shut down and its transport networks disrupted. The protest was in opposition to plans that raised the retirement age from 62 to 64, although the change would still keep France below the European average retirement age of 65. Now, the French government says the measure is needed to address a pension funding deficit, but opinion polls show 2/3 of voters oppose the changes. Meanwhile, in Pakistan, the death toll from Monday's suicide bombing has risen to more than 100, with at least 217 injured. The deadly blast occurred during prayer at a mosque and a police compound in the city of Peshawar. It's suspected that the bombing took place and was targeting police officers and that roughly 12 kilograms of explosives were used. The Pakistan Taliban, or TTP, have been linked to the attack, but a spokesperson has denied responsibility. The region has seen a spike in militant attacks since November. This after the TTP ended a ceasefire with the government forces. Moving over to Denmark now, where a new museum is preparing to open an exhibit featuring some of the more recent dinosaur discoveries. Located in Nuthenburg Safari Park and called the Museum of Evolution, the venue will open to the public in April. It will host a newly discovered horned dinosaur which lived 82 million years ago and was an ancestor of the famous Triceratops. The museum will also showcase Big Joe. The roughly 155 million-year-old specimen is an Allosaurus that's 95% intact. It's one of the most complete of its kind in the world. And finally, a comet with a green hue is due to pass by Earth for the first time in about 50,000 years. Formerly called C2022 E3ZTF, the celestial body will swing past our planet at a distance of some 42 million kilometers between February 1st and 2nd. Its lengthy orbit passes through the solar system's outer reaches, and this is the closest that it will come to Earth. NASA is set to observe the comet using the James Webb Telescope, which may provide a glimpse into the solar system's formation. Now, keen sky watchers in the Northern Hemisphere will be able to spot the comet.
Good morning. It's a dreary start to the day for those of us in the western parts of the country, with thick fog and visibility are as low as 1 kilometer in the capital region, along with high humidity. On top of that, high levels of fine dust is no help for those behind the wheel this morning. Meanwhile, regions along the East Coast regions are still dealing with dry conditions, with a dry weather and strong wind advisory being in place. It's a milder start to the day, but highs are forecast to be a few notches lower this afternoon before chillier air moves into the country late this afternoon. Unlike the capital region, the rest of the country is starting out the day under sunny skies. Then southern provinces will see highs hovering around 10 degrees Celsius this afternoon. With that in mind, here's a look at the weather conditions around the globe.
That wraps up today's New Day at Arirang. Do stay with us for more updates throughout the day. Thanks for watching.